let's talk about trauma. Just give you an overview. And this is our timeline. If you think of this as our life's timeline, I often talk in terms of ideas, and particularly a covenant of ideas. Now, what do I mean by that? How do we form thought? How do we form actions? Or how do we live? How does the cognitive mind begin to process and live out our experiences, our values? Where do our values come from? Where do they originate? Yeah.
Is that the whole tabula rasa idea, where you have this clear mind, and as you go forward,
yeah,
there's a learning from your environment, there's learning nature and nurture, that sort of
exactly,
those
yeah.
arguments.
Yeah, our learning, our ideas are formulated what? In our early years, right? Yeah. From our parents, from friends, from the environment, from media, from school teachers, from church, synagogue, temple, wherever, and especially culturally, right? Some of us are old enough, as I look around, to have lived through the 70s. At an adult age, or at least an understanding age. And what was the philosophy back then? What was the culture saying back then?
Do whatever you want to do to make it feel good, do it.
Do it. If it feels good, do it.
Whatever makes you happy.
Now, for some of us, go ahead, say what?
Make my phone the P phone.
I still didn't understand what
I didn't know my company, guy. Well, make my phone the P phone.
There you go.
Funky jealous.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that not only in our culture as people behaved in that way, but we saw it in the media. We saw it in our songs. We saw it. How many remember Barry Manilow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Barry Manilow started his career back in the late mid-70s with a little jingle that he wrote for McDonald's, right? Good. Man, you either know this stuff or must have been in one of my groups earlier. But,
that's I was in one of you.
Okay, all right. So you know the jingle, right? You deserve a break today, so get up and get away. But what's it saying? What are the words there? You deserve. You deserve something. And it just falls in with everything else that our society screams at us. It's all about you. And if you don't get what you get, then life is miserable. So what's the point of that? The point of that is when we talk in terms of trauma, our society is not going to help us very much, our culture, because they're screaming this philosophy at us. They're saying it's okay. Actually, they're saying, another thing they're saying has to do with suffering. That's a bad word in our society today, right? I mean, nobody wants to suffer, right? How many want to suffer? Nobody. But what society says is that if you suffer, there's something wrong with you, or there's something wrong somewhere. But the point is that we're trained cognitively, we're trained to run away from suffering. And so when it comes to trauma, when it comes to these kinds of things in recovery, we're a little bit skittish, aren't we? We don't want to embrace the hard things that have to happen. So the point is, what I'm trying to say is, part of our recovery, part of this group, is to begin thinking that suffering is, in some ways, our friend. Suffering, we need to embrace suffering. We need to embrace those things that the world calls no good, but that can help us in our recovery if we allow suffering to be a natural human reaction. Or allow suffering to have us grow in a very, very human way. Brian, you had yours.
Sometimes you gotta kiss the monster on the nose.
Exactly, you gotta kiss the monster on the nose. Yeah, Anthony?
So in other words, embracing, accepting it too.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to accept it, right? How many of you taking acceptance commitment therapy? Okay. Part of acceptance commitment therapy is that first word, acceptance. I accept. How many of you have done 12 steps? Right? So one of the steps, I accept the what? I accept the situation I'm in because I feel powerless. I'm powerless, so I accept. The message there is that I need to somehow be aware of where I am in my recovery, creating space so that I'm mindful, and that's where part of the mindfulness piece in ACT, in acceptance commitment therapy, where that works out so that we can what? Focus on reality. And one of the assumptions is what? What you focus on is your reality. Is your reality. Go ahead. Give me your name again, I'm sorry.
RJ.
RJ, that's right, RJ.
I truly believe that acceptance is the answer to all my problems. That if I can just accept, like, you know, the bitter, which is sweetest, and just look at the solutions and not always the problem itself, that, you know, I believe that I'll be a lot better off.
Yeah, yeah. One of the, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just thinking about one of the philosophies of Christianity is that, you know, as Christians, you know, we kind of called to something.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it has teachings like, you know, turning the other cheek.
Yeah, good point. Good point. If you're a Christian, you're called to suffer, right? You're called to bear why? Because Jesus suffered. He bore the cross. And so he even tells his disciples what? If you follow me, you will suffer. You will go through the same things. You know, as I grow older, when people ask me about Christianity, about my faith, and they're exploring and they're wondering, it's been my practice now in sharing the gospel that at the end of our conversation, after I explain what's expected and what the Bible says about being saved and going to heaven and all of that, I let them know. I don't let them leave without saying this. And that is something to do with counting the cost. And I'll tell them, I said, you know what you're getting into. Not that I want to discourage them, but I said, you know, I remember my own experience. I thought when I accepted Christ in my life, Christianity was just going to take care of everything. And I was going to be all smiles and the world was going to love me and I was going to love the world. And everything was going to be, everything is beautiful. Remember that song? I really thought that was going to happen. But in many ways, it was just the opposite. Because there were demands. Christ demands certain things from us. Just to live a Christian life in this society is just so difficult. You see, who had their hand up? Back here, right there.
Yeah, speaking of acceptance, I've just recently concluded that there is no cure for life. But if you just go ahead and accept it, you feel better every day.
Yeah.
That's just how I feel.
Yeah. And you mentioned your name again, I'm forgetting.
Daryl.
Daryl brings up a good point. I know I'm getting away from this, but another thing that I have an issue with, well, I have an issue with the first word, flourishing, thank you, are these two words, they're tossed around. This one particularly, cure, which Daryl mentioned. And again, it's a little side note, but this expectation in recovery is that we all come in, not all of us, but maybe many of us come in with this idea of being cured, right? We hear it on TV, we hear it everywhere, right? Now, there's a place for the word cure, but in recovery, I'm beginning to dislike the word cure, because what does cure do? When somebody says, right, it mentally, even though you're not there, somebody says you're going to do this or, you know, be involved in this program, you're going to go through this therapy, you're going to take these meds, and there's going to be a cure someday. But what happens mentally, you create space And when you create that space, knowing that there's a cure in the end, what happens? There's a tendency to wait
Right.
and to kind of put life on hold. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay?
And the expectations is unreal.
Yeah, and your expectations are changed and all that stuff. And so that's why I don't like the word cure. I'd rather think in terms of flourishing.
Constant.
Because we're flourishing. Because what happens in flourishing?
Just constantly, it's
We are constantly, with just small incremental steps,
progress.
we are growing, right? We're growing in, or towards, I should say, hope and meaning and purpose and all those wonderful words
And good action, brother.
that help us in our recovery, right?
Right.
Yes.
Can you back that up? Because,
Sure.
I really didn't catch what's the formula that's going to help you grow and hope and believe.
Yeah, there's no formulas. We don't do formulas. Life is too complex.
Because it's like,
Yeah,
you know, in my active addiction,
yeah.
you know, it said, you know, we don't want to embrace suffering, you know. Well,
We do want to embrace suffering.
we do want to embrace suffering.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, it's like, there's a brokenness, there's a humility, you know what I mean, and recovery,
Okay.
you know.
Well, let me answer the question because that leads into what we want to talk about for the next 10 minutes or so. So let's get back. So do you understand this about cure and flourishing?
Yeah.
And what it does for me particularly, you know, just as a chaplain, as a husband, as a student, as a son, as a father, it relieves a lot of angst.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense of I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I can just be better tomorrow than yesterday, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to, you know, warp drive into the future. Okay? So what am I saying there? Maybe a side note to that is that recovery takes time.
Right. You know, I
Hey.
use the process. Trust
Yeah,
the
it's a process, right?
Mhm.
And let me tell you, again, recovery is something that happens to everybody.
Yeah.
It's not just people with mental health issues, but if you believe in the fallenness of man, you know what I mean by that, the fallenness of man, that we were created perfect, but then fell. This is a great Christian
I
concept.
might say the imperfection of me.
The imperfection of man. Yeah, so that imperfection gets in the way of everything, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so if I flourish, or if I have this idea of flourishing, I'm chipping away at rebuilding that image that was distorted. Okay? So, all right, well, let's get back to this real quick. So that's where we're heading. We're heading towards hope, meaning, truth, purpose, truth. Truth is something that, again, in recovery, is something that goes along with purpose and meaning, right? If you don't know the truth, then what? You're living a lie, right?